Imagine the silence of death, the final breath rattling from your lungs as darkness presses in, the heartbeat fading, the body too broken to ever rise again. For most, that silence is the end. But in the grim future of the 41st millennium, for some, the silence is only the beginning of an eternity more cruel than death itself. Picture a warrior who has given everything, limbs torn away, organs shredded, skull half pulped, yet whose spirit still burns too fiercely for the Imperium to let go. He should rest among the honored dead, his name etched in marble and his remains interred beneath cathedral vaults. But instead, he is entombed alive in a sarcophagus of metal and wire, his ravaged body fused with ancient machine, his mind shackled between the flicker of humanity and the cold eternity of the machine spirit. He becomes a dreadnought, a prison of steel and ceramite, a coffin that walks. The first thing to fail was the sound of his own breathing, not the ragged gasp of lungs torn and pierced, not the copper taste of blood flooding the back of the throat, but the simple rhythmic presence that had once been as certain as the rising of the sun. He felt it falter, catch, and collapse into silence. In that silence, the battlefield roared louder. The din of bolter fire echoed through broken hab blocks. The screech of Xeno's claws raked against ceramite, and the thunder of collapsing walls swallowed all human cries. Yet within him the rhythm of life staggered, as if the body had finally acknowledged that it was finished. He had fought for 3 days without pause. His name was Brother Calixus of the Emperor's Angels, a warrior of the Adeptus Astartes. To his brothers, he had been the iron wall that held the line when mortal regiments faltered, the bearer of the chapter's ancient standard that snapped defiantly in the wind of war. Now he lay broken, his body pinned beneath rubble, his once mighty limbs reduced to shattered husks, his armor torn open like parchment. He tried to lift the banner once more, to keep it upright as enemy shadows closed in, but his arm no longer obeyed him. He could feel only the grinding of bone and the flood of pain, hot and raw, coursing through nerves that had once been trained to ignore suffering. Even a space marine has limits, and his had been reached. Around him the battle raged on without him. He heard the voices of his brothers through vox-distorted static, the cries of "Hold the line!" and "For the Emperor!" fading in and out like fragments of a dream. He could not rise to join them, though every fiber of his spirit demanded it. Instead, he lay in the dirt, half blinded by his own blood, tasting promethium smoke on the air. The scent was sharp, bitter, choking. Somewhere in the haze, a hymn of bolter fire rose and fell. And then there was only the deep, resonant tremor of something vast moving in the distance. An enemy engine, perhaps, or the collapse of another tower. For a moment he thought of his youth. He thought of the fortress monastery where he had been remade, the long stone halls echoing with the chants of chaplains, the smell of sacred oils rubbed into his skin before battle, the weight of ceramite placed upon him for the first time. All of that seemed impossibly distant, a lifetime already past. Now there was only the weight of rubble across his chest and the shuddering collapse of his organs. He knew in the clarity of that moment that he was dying. Yet death did not come. The Emperor, in his unfathomable will, did not allow it. Instead, Brother Calixus felt the tug of hands upon him, strong and merciless, dragging him from the wreckage. He could not see clearly, but he sensed the presence of red-robed figures, their voices murmuring binary canticles, their mechadendrites clamping and probing the broken ruin of his body. The tech marines had found him. He realized then that he would not be permitted to die. Inwardly, he tried to resist. He wanted to surrender to the void, to let the pain dissolve into nothingness. But the Imperium has no mercy for those who serve it. His body was already too far gone. His legs pulverized, his chest cavity ruptured, half his skull crushed. A mortal would have been a corpse hours ago, but he was Astartes. His gene-forged resilience meant he still clung to life no matter how broken that life was. And because he clung, he could be saved. In a manner of speaking, the tech marines worked swiftly. He felt the burning pain of cauterizers sealing flesh, the hiss of fluid injections forcing his heart to beat against its will, the alien sensation of being lifted by servo claws rather than human hands. Somewhere far above, the sky was split by tracer fire and the screams of dying men. But he was carried downward, away from the battle, into the cold sanctums beneath the fortress lines. He thought perhaps he was being taken to the apothecarian, that he would be laid upon the slabs of the reclusium, and his name honored in the litany of the dead. He was wrong. Instead, the descent took him deeper still, into the chambers he had only ever glimpsed from a distance, forbidden to tread except in times of dire need. The vaults of the ancients. He recognized the sound of the great doors grinding open, the solemn chants of the chapter serfs echoing like distant thunder. The air was heavy with incense, metallic and cloying, thick enough to make what remained of his lungs burn. He tried to cry out, to protest, to beg for release, but no words came. His jaw was shattered, his vox grill destroyed. Only a rasp of breath emerged, a sound quickly drowned beneath the clamor of Mechanicum hymns. Then he saw it, or rather felt it. The looming presence of something vast, ancient and slumbering. Its silhouette was blurred through the haze, but he knew it by instinct. A dreadnought, a war casket that had walked for centuries, its adamantine hide scarred by wars long forgotten. He felt terror, not of death but of the eternity being offered to him, for he knew what it meant. He would not die here. He would be entombed. The chamber into which they bore him was not a place for the living. Every wall was carved with devotional script, every arch hung with chains of votive seals, every surface slick with the residue of incense smoke and sacred oils. The tech marines moved with mechanical certainty, their voices weaving Binharic static and Gothic prayer into a single discordant hymn. Brother Calixtus was lowered onto a slab of obsidian shot through with veins of gold, a funerary bed that was not a grave. The air was bitter with the sting of unguents and ozone, and above him loomed the massive sarcophagus where he would be sealed. It was open now, its hollow chamber yawning like a predator's maw waiting for him. He wanted to cry out, to tell them no, to let him die. But what voice he had left was smothered by tubes shoved down his throat and wires piercing his chest. He felt his blood being drained, his failing organs supplanted by artificial rhythms, his remaining senses overwhelmed by the clamor of machinery. The world narrowed to pulses of light and shadow as the tech marines chanted litanies of awakening, preparing the machine spirit that would soon be grafted to his own mind. He had fought demons and Xenos horrors, yet nothing in his life had filled him with such dread as this moment. One of them, a Magos of the Forge, leaned close. His voice was calm but hollow, filtered through a vox grill. "Your body is finished, Brother Calixtus, but your service is not. The chapter has deemed your spirit worthy of preservation. You will endure as those before you have endured. Endure." The word rang like a sentence. He was not being given life. He was being condemned to something beyond it. His shattered skull could not form words, but his mind screamed. Yet there was no appeal, no mercy. In the Imperium, service does not end with the breaking of the body. Service only ends in final dissolution, and the tech marines had no intention of permitting that end while the ember of his spirit still burned. They began the rite. He felt his body stripped of what little flesh could be spared, his ruined limbs sawn away. His chest opened further so that his ravaged organs might be interfaced with sacred machinery. The pain was not pain as he had ever known it. It was a torrent, a flood of agony that bypassed every discipline, every meditative trance he had ever been taught. His vision dissolved into a storm of red and black. At moments he thought he could feel his brother's voices nearby, whispering encouragement. At other times he thought he saw faces from his distant youth, but whether these were hallucinations or memories dredged up by trauma, he could not say. The sarcophagus loomed closer. He was lifted by servo arms and lowered toward it, his broken body suspended in a frame of restraints and dripping wires. The machine spirit within stirred, ancient and impatient. He could feel its presence like the echo of a storm rumbling just beyond hearing. It was not alive, not as he was, yet it was no simple tool either. It had known centuries of war, centuries of silence. It resented intrusion and demanded respect. Soon he would not only be trapped within iron, but forced to share his consciousness with this cold and unyielding companion. As the sarcophagus closed around him, every sense rebelled. The hiss of the seal was the sound of a tomb being shut forever. The world outside was gone, cut off by a shell of adamantine and ceramite. The last thing he saw with his eyes, the real eyes of flesh, was the glimmer of a burning brazier, its flame reflected in the polished gold of a tech marine's mask. Then the darkness was absolute. There was no silence, though. Inside, the machine roared to life. His nerves lit with fire as fiber optic veins burned their way into his flesh, linking what remained of his nervous system to a lattice of circuits and conduits. Each heartbeat was stolen, processed, and fed back to him by the machinery. Every breath was filtered through iron lungs that hissed and clamped like prison gates. And beneath it all was the machine spirit, pressing against his mind, testing him, measuring him, forcing its way into his consciousness. For hours, or perhaps days, time no longer meant anything. Brother Calixtus drifted in a storm of half-dreams. Sometimes he thought he was still on the battlefield, crawling through rubble while bolters roared. Sometimes he thought he was back within the fortress monastery, listening to the chants of chaplains. At other times he felt nothing at all, suspended in a void without sound or light, certain that he had at last died. Yet always the presence of the machine remained, pulling him back, anchoring him to the iron tomb. When at last he awoke, if awakening it could be called, he no longer felt the rubble crushing him, no longer tasted blood in his mouth. Instead he felt weight, vast inhuman weight pressing down on every movement, every thought. He tried to move his arm, but there was no arm. Instead something titanic groaned and shifted, pistons hissing, joints grinding. He tried to draw breath, but instead of lungs there was only the rasp of vented steam. He tried to cry out, but the sound that emerged was a hollow metallic bellow that shook the chamber. And in that moment, the truth was undeniable. He was no longer Brother Calixtus. He was the sarcophagus, the machine, the coffin that walked. His flesh was gone, his humanity entombed. He had become a dreadnought. The first thing he heard was not a voice but a hymn, low and resonant. It vibrated through the armored walls of his new body like a heartbeat that was not his own. The sound was ritualistic, each note measured and heavy with centuries of repetition. He could not see yet. The world remained dark, an abyss behind sealed lenses, but he felt the vibrations of chanting acolytes moving about him, their words layering in binary and Gothic, a mixture of machine prayer and liturgical supplication. Light struck suddenly. His vision flared alive with a blinding rush of images, fractured and raw. as the augmetics wired into his skull funneled data into his mind. No human eyes remained to blink. Instead, he perceived in a way wholly alien. Every detail crisp, too sharp, too vivid. The flames of braziers shimmered in shades of heat. Each acolyte's body a pale silhouette of warmth beneath robes. Every scratch and weld mark in the vaulted chamber rendered in merciless clarity. His mind reeled at the intensity. Then came the pain. It was not the ordinary pain of broken flesh. That had been stripped from him. Instead, it was an ache that echoed through every conduit of his being, as though his very soul were being stretched across gears and pistons. His spirit clashed with the machine spirit that now lived beside it, the two minds grinding against one another in a discordant union. He felt its cold alien weight pressing into his thoughts, ancient and stubborn. It did not think as he did. It hungered for war, for the tremor of heavy weapons, for the thunder of armored feet. It cared nothing for his memories, his fears, or his humanity. And now he was bound to it. Forever. The tech marines stepped forward, their red forms looming, their augmetic hands raised in benediction. "Awaken, brother," one intoned. "Awaken, honored relic of the chapter. Your battle is not finished." Their words struck him like iron shackles. He tried to speak, to ask why, to plead for rest, but the sound that tore from his vox emitter was a guttural growl, deep and metallic. It did not carry meaning, only rage and confusion. The acolytes did not recoil. Instead, they bowed their heads lower as though this mechanical roar were a sacred response. They began their rites of calibration. He felt hatches in his shell open and close as oils were poured into his joints, sacred glyphs etched along his armor, purity seals affixed with whispered prayers. His body was not his own. It was now a relic, a weapon, a thing of veneration. They did not touch him as a brother. They touched him as one touches a sacred artifact. The realization cut deeper than any wound. His memories fought to surface. He tried to recall the faces of his squad, the banner he had once held, the charge that had broken him. But each memory was assaulted by overlays of machine code and tactical readouts, scrolling across his vision. Ammunition counts, thermal signatures, structural analyses of the chamber around him. His mind was no longer his own. Every thought competed with the endless hum of data, and he felt himself drowning in it. Somewhere in the haze, a chaplain's voice rose above the chanting, deep, booming, filled with the authority of one who had stood at the Emperor's altar for 100 years. "Brother Calixus," the chaplain thundered, "your flesh has failed, but your spirit endures. In you lies the Emperor's will. In you lies our chapter's legacy. You are bound not in chains of despair, but in iron of glory. Rise and fight again." And against his will he did rise. The sarcophagus clamps hissed open, and massive limbs moved with the weight of thunder. The ground shook as he stepped forward, each motion a terrible labor, like mountains grinding against one another. His hands, if they could be called hands, were no longer flesh and bone but adamantine claws. Bolter barrels fused into one arm, a power fist the size of a man's body on the other. He looked down at himself and saw not a warrior, not a brother, but a monster wrought for war. The acolytes knelt. The chaplain raised his crozius in salute. The tech marines lowered their heads as if before an altar. To them his awakening was triumph. To him it was a death without burial. He was revered, yes, but what good is reverence to the one who has lost everything? He felt the machine spirit pulse again, eager now, straining against the leash of ceremony. It longed for war, and in its hunger he felt his own fury ignited, rage at his broken body, rage at being denied death. rage at the fate of being entombed forever in this steel sarcophagus, and perhaps beneath all that, rage at himself for surviving when others had not. That rage merged with the machine spirit's will, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to be a dreadnought. Not simply a warrior encased in iron, not simply a relic preserved, but a creature of war and suffering, a soul chained to a body that would never rest, never heal, never die. The chaplain's words faded into the distance. The acolytes dispersed and the vault doors opened onto the world above. Light poured in, harsh cold filled with the smoke of battle still raging outside. His first steps into that light were thunderous, each footfall cracking the stone beneath him. He emerged not as Brother Calixtus but as something else, something eternal. And in that moment he knew the breaking of his flesh had been only the first of many breakings to come. The battlefield received him with the same indifference it had always shown. Smoke billowed in pillars black and acrid, swallowing the horizon in a haze of ruin. The stench of promethium fires clung to every breath, though his new lungs filtered it into sterile data. His ears no longer heard in fleshly tones. Instead, they were flooded with layered signals, vox chatter, auspex sweeps, seismic readings of the ground itself trembling under artillery. The human senses that once grounded him were gone. Now he perceived war as the machine did. Total, endless, unavoidable. When he stepped from the fortress gates, the earth itself shuddered. Each stride gouged trenches into the ash-choked soil. He remembered the feeling of running once, the fluid grace of ceramite-clad limbs, the rhythm of his bolter against his shoulder. Those memories mocked him now, for every movement was alien, burdened by weight beyond comprehension. His power was vast, but it was not his own. Enemy fire greeted him immediately. Last beams hissed through the smoke, spattering across his armor like droplets of rain. Heavy ordnance slammed into his chest, detonating in concussive bursts that would have annihilated tanks. He staggered, more in shock than damage, for the sarcophagus absorbed the fury with ease. He felt the impacts as dull tremors shivering through his frame, an echo of pain rather than pain itself. It was surreal. He was in the line of fire, yet death no longer threatened him. He could not die so easily now. The machine spirit rejoiced. He felt it surge, its cold hunger swelling within him, demanding reprisal. His weapon arm rose without thought, barrels glowing as a storm of bolter shells roared forth. The recoil shook him like the pounding of a giant's heart. Enemies burst apart in clouds of gore and shattered armor, their bodies reduced to fragments in an instant. He turned, his power fist slamming into the wreckage of a transport, crushing it into scrap with a single blow. The enemy screamed and broke before him, their courage dissolving beneath the titanic wrath of his new form. And yet, as they fled, he felt nothing. No exhilaration, no triumph, only the hollow weight of inevitability. He was unstoppable, yes, but what did it matter when every victory was bought with his eternity? The enemies he slew would be replaced. The war would go on, and he would march forever, never dying, never resting, a god of war with the soul of a prisoner. Through the vox he heard his brothers. "The ancients walk. Victory is assured." Their voices were filled with reverence, awe, pride. To them, his presence was a blessing. He was not Brother Calixtus to them anymore. He was an ancient, a relic of the chapter, the embodiment of their unbroken lineage. They fought harder in his shadow, their chants rising to match his thunderous steps. He wanted to tell them the truth, that he was no blessing but a curse given form. But the only voice that emerged was the guttural roar of his vox grill, twisted and mechanical, and they heard in it only the affirmation of faith. The battle raged for hours, or perhaps days. Time bled away in the haze of destruction. Each foe he crushed, each volley he unleashed was another nail in the coffin of his humanity. The machine spirit reveled in slaughter, and in its fervor it consumed him more and more. He found himself surrendering to it, letting it guide his blows, letting it silence the memories of pain. It was easier that way. Easier to drift into the mechanical certainty of killing than to cling to the fragments of what he had once been. When at last the enemy broke and the field was theirs, he stood amidst the ruins like a monument. Smoke curled around his armored bulk. Bodies lay in heaps at his feet, and the chapter's banner waved proudly over the shattered remains of enemy fortifications. His brothers gathered around him, raising their weapons in salute, their voices chanting hymns of victory. He looked down upon them, towering like a colossus, and for a fleeting moment he felt like something more than a prisoner. He felt like a god of war, but when the chants faded and the smoke thinned, the truth settled upon him once more. He could not lay down his arms. He could not return to a barracks or share in feasts. He would not sit with his brothers and recount tales of the battle. He would be led back into the vault, sealed once again in darkness, his voice unheard, his body motionless. He was a hero, yes, but only a hero when war demanded it. The rest of his eternity would be silence. As the Tech Marines guided him back toward the fortress gates, the weight of victory meant nothing. He had walked the battlefield as a titan, yet inside he felt smaller than he had ever been. In his heart, if he still had one, he whispered a prayer, not for himself but for those still whole, that they might fall swiftly when their time came. For to linger beyond death, to be denied the peace of the grave, was the most terrible fate of all, and so the first chapter of his eternity closed, not with the relief of survival, but with the dawning horror that his life had ended, and yet he would never die.